Welcome everyone and good afternoon to our Speedinvest Industrial Tech Talk. It's the 11th Tech Talk. My name is Marie-Helene and I'm from Speedinvest. And we're very excited of today's topic as we're gonna share with you the main findings of our 2021 report on European industrial tech. Before we start off, some general information to you. Please, if you want to ask any questions, use the Q&A function. We will try in the end of each session to answer those questions. Secondly, I know you're all excited to read the report, so we will, after the event, immediately send an email with the link to the download of the report so you can have a look. So what do we wait for the next 2 hours? We have this one slogan that we love to use, and that's the industry goes digital and green. And I think the year 2021, and this is what we can learn from the report, was a real game changer for industrial tech as a category. The number of startups, the number of unicorns, exits, enterprise values, everything has grown in this last year over proportional. I think some of you do know there were some clear drivers to this phenomena, foremost the whole COVID crisis. So a lot of companies, actually 67% of corporates reported that this led to an accelerated digital adoption. There was also, of course, and we can read that daily, an increased pressure in ESG. I mean, the industry and logistics sector is accountable for 38% of the CO2 emissions. So with that, clearly, the corporate world is looking for innovative technologies to solve that. And lastly, one driver was the strong appetite from foreign investors, non-EU investors. That's good and bad. But this year, over almost 60% actually of the investments in industrial tech startups came from non-EU investors, foremost the US. So yes, there was a hype, but still we are really at the beginning of a major wave in the digitization of the industrial sector. There is still only 5%, which is in absolute numbers 3.8 billion of investments from the overall VC investments running into industrial tech. This has increased from 3% in 2020, but still in relation that Europe's wealth is really built on the industrial power. The whole sector of industrial tech investments of venture is massively underserved. And that is also the reason why we said last year that we want to, together with Deal Room, work on this report. So this report, this yearly report, has the clear intention to help define and spotlight industrial tech as an investment category. So what we started off in the beginning was simply to define what is industrial tech. What's in, what's not in. Also to understand a bit the dynamics and the specifics of industrial tech. We all know that's a different beast to invest in an industrial tech startup than to some marketplace or e-commerce app. And also with this report, we try to bring light into the ecosystem of industrial tech, also the corporate world and their role, and the universities, grants. So I think the report that we have is really insightful, and I would like to thank at this point also Deal Room for the entrepreneurial spirit to start into this new category. Also, I'd like to thank my colleagues, to Leo and Lisa, for organizing the report, and as well to all the contributors for today, participating in panels or giving some speeches. And with that, it's a big pleasure actually to introduce our first speaker, Robin. Probably a lot of you know him for his wonderful newsletter. He's a real pioneer when it comes to industrial tech. Many years active as an investor. He initiated also the Future of Manufacturing community. Today, actually, he's an entrepreneur running his own startup, Aveo, and Aveo is helping to upskill actually and reskill the frontline workforce. So a super hot topic, I think, that is relevant to many of us. With that, Robin, great to have you here, and I hand over to you.
Thank you, Marie-Helene. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for being here. Also, before I start with a short talk, I want to thank you, in general, Speedinvest and D-Room for the report. I think, yeah, the report from last year has been probably one of the resources I shared the most. I think it's a very comprehensive piece of information, and also I think it gives basically a bit more spotlight to many people who are working in the industry, which I think is still a bit underserved by the media or by other investors. So kudos to D-Room and Speedinvest on that side. So let me quickly share my screen. 1 second. Cool. So I think you can see it. If you have any questions, please interrupt me or put something into the chat. Happy to answer any questions. I know that these virtual settings sometimes can feel a bit like a little bit boring. So if we can make it somehow interactive, I'm more than happy to answer questions or also to go into a discussion, even though I know we're short on time. So I want to take the next 20 minutes roughly to talk a bit about the manufacturing industry in general, about like my learnings, my personal learnings from the last few years, and how this also transitions into the future that I think we all are very excited about and we basically want to create together. Just very briefly about myself, I mean, Marie-Helene touched on the main points. I studied industrial engineering and management in Karlsruhe, spent then 4.5 years at Point 9 Capital, where I was basically investing 1 to 3 million in early stage startups, mostly in Europe and North America, and especially in software marketplaces. I got particularly very excited about manufacturing as an industry in early 2017, where this, I think, was somehow like the first wave of new companies, of new startups popping up here and there in this industry. And so I back then started a newsletter called The Future of Manufacturing that has been read, that is read by, I think, a few thousand people now. That I turned also into a community earlier this year, where we have roughly 200 people talking about the future of manufacturing in various virtual sessions and also like asynchronously in different channels. And then I recently started Aveo together with a friend of mine, where we basically build online learning programs around digital transformation. Mostly, I think the most exciting course probably for you guys here is the one about digital transformation manufacturing, which I promise is the most hands-on course on a subject you can get. So if you're interested, just talk to me afterwards or reach out on aveo.one. So without further ado, I think this year actually the term Industry 4.0 had its 10th birthday. The German government coined this term Industry 4.0 10 years ago. I think it created a lot of hype. It created a lot of, I think, inflated expectations. Mostly people probably, if they have heard about Industry 4.0, they assumed, you know, somebody maybe wearing VR glasses, seeing maybe real-time data from the factory floor within these glasses, maybe even can control remotely machines from a different location, or, you know, assuming you can already, you know, basically orchestrate the whole factory, the machines and robots with a simple tap of an iPad. And while I think this is great, and this is, I think, a great aspiration, and I think eventually we'll get there, all we got, and of course that's a bit sarcastic, but I think this term probably, the pilot purgatory, came up at least as often as Industry 4.0. So if you work together with young companies, with founders in this industry, I'm very sure that they talked with you about the so-called pilot purgatory. What it basically means is that large companies, or in general companies, are trying out new products, are trying out services and innovation in like a pilot project. But then the problem is that many of these pilot projects, they get stalled, they won't make it until the rollout, things get delayed and so on. And while this is not necessarily like a problem for large corporations, it's a big problem for young companies, especially the ones that are not profitable because they raise money and then they have runway for like 18 to 24 months. And if they cannot show traction and progress, they will be dead. And it's kind of, I think it's a lot about, you know, expectation management, a lot about collaboration and processes. And I think there's a lot of learnings in the past 2 years that I think both parties in general made out of this. But it definitely also has been a problem, I think, and one challenge why we maybe are today where we are. And I think, and now is a more subjective opinion, but I think probably, at least personally, I think I would have hoped we're already a bit more further with the whole industry than where we are today. However, I think it's just a question of timing. If you think about innovation in general, if you think about, you know, certain industries and how digitized they are, it often goes a little bit like this S-curve here, right? So very slowly in the beginning, maybe people think it's not going anywhere. But then at some point, there will be this inflection point. And there will be this inflection point where suddenly things move much faster, innovation speeds up much more. And I think the manufacturing industry, similar to other industries, is also going through this S-curve. And if you think about healthcare, for example, I think a few years ago, probably healthcare was in a similar situation where people were, and especially investors, were maybe a little bit frustrated. Things are not moving fast enough. Companies are not growing fast enough. It's still such an old school market. And I think also now healthcare probably is a market that it's much more appealing for new companies and where also investors made a lot of money in the past 1 or 2 years. And I think manufacturing is probably like similar. I don't know exactly when this inflection point will be reached, but I'm very sure that at some point we will get there, and then things will get much faster. And I think that's at least, I think, for everybody who is building in this industry, is I think a super exciting development. We maybe need a little bit more patient, but I think at some point we will get there. And similar, you know, with sustainability, like topics like this, I think sustainability definitely at the moment is at this inflection point where a lot of things are actually getting built and getting implemented. And I think sometimes for us humans, it's a bit hard to understand radical innovation and to actually understand how fast things are moving. And so here's just a few examples. And it's the data from GP Bullhound that created this report in 2019, where you see that investments are actually accelerating at decreasing device costs. And this is true for robotics, this is true for sensors, this is true for 3D printing, this is true for drones, and also for other technologies and other hardware systems. And if you just compare these numbers, and there's an approximation by GP Bullhound, but just, you know, take it as an example. If you compare these numbers, for example, the cost per unit, how fast it decreased, I think it's actually pretty mind-blowing. And now if we can extrapolate this into the future, it will be probably even more so. And at the same time, and this is something I'm personally extremely excited about, there's kind of like a new factory stack that will be developed as we speak. So it's a very simple abstraction that I usually use. So, you know, if you think about a factory has several elements, from machines to workers to sensors and devices to something like a data layer for like where all the data basically gets together, and then also software applications like an ERP, like a manufacturing execution system, for example. And if you think about, you know, this kind of like factory stack, how it looks today and how it looks like in the future, I think the importance of some of these elements will change. So first of all, I think workers will still be important. I don't think that workers will be automated anytime soon. They might change the role, they might change even like the job and the jobs to be done, but they won't get obsolete. But in general, I would say, you know, things like software application, for example, or like the data layer or like the sensor and device layer will definitely be more important. And I think it's a bit similar to other verticals as well here, like manufacturing. I think at the moment, the problem is that many factories are just built very differently. They have been operated for many years, for decades. There's different machines. I think I usually compare the shop floor like a LAN party, you know. Everybody brought in his or her own sensor or machine, and then all things get plugged together and it somehow works. And I think now slowly, you know, we go to this, I think, phase where there's more infrastructure, there will be more platforms, there will be more software in the cloud, which then I think is a super exciting opportunity for new companies, new products to be built on top of this infrastructure. And so, I think this will enable just a whole lot of like new opportunities in the next few years to come. And I think in general, the industry is basically moving into the direction to the right. So yes, of course, there's a lot of like legacy systems, software that got built just, for one factory specifically, maybe not even the cloud. It's a monolithic system. There's no API. It's super hard to plug into it or to integrate with it. But I think we're going to this transition where, we will have like more modular systems, or I think what's even more interesting to more like let's say these platform solutions, right? Where you have machines, where you have potentially like a data layer or like a data lake, where all the data from the machines will be getting to this data lake. And then some sort of like platform where people can basically build different apps on top of these platforms, similar to like the App Store. Who is owning or building these platforms? I think it's a discussion for itself. I'll make a few examples later. But I think it's a very interesting development now that I think is slowly but surely basically getting there. And so when I was still at Point9, I basically saw these new companies popping up in the manufacturing industry, all these startups. And suddenly when I was really going to the rabbit hole, basically there were so many companies, it was really hard for me to keep up with it. And so I created like an Excel file that I then turned into like this landscape. This is a picture of it from winter 2018. So roughly after, let's say, 10 to 12 months when I started out. It's by far not complete. You can definitely also criticize maybe, the different areas because maybe, a company fits maybe better into another one. But I thought that back then, at least, and that's also the feedback I've gotten, it was kind of like a comprehensive overview. And so this is from winter 2018. And now I'll show you basically the one from summer 2021, so 3.5 years later, and it looks like this. Again, it's far from being complete. Definitions can maybe vary, and maybe it's a little bit subjective. But I think it gives you a very good overview actually of like the last 3 years or 3.5 years there. What happened, and also I think kind of like how exploding some of the sectors were. So if we think about robotics, for example, back then there were, I don't know, like 20, 25 companies. I think now there's many, many more. You needed to basically size up the image. And that's also similar for other areas, right? Where there's like many more companies now working on some of these use cases. I also need to add some companies also didn't make it within this 3.5 years. I think that's just, that's just startup life. Companies, not every company is working. But I think some of these companies, I don't think so. I'm really sure that some of these companies, you will definitely see them becoming very big and also potentially, getting acquired or even going IPO. This is just a few examples here from like a few companies. There's many more. There's really a lot of, I think, really smart teams and founders working on different topics. I know we have Christian here from Wandelbots, which I think is also like a really cool company in the robotics space that I really admire, also for the culture they've created. So just 4 examples here from 4 different areas. So we have, for example, in the predictive maintenance area, Augury, a company now that turned 10 years old, recently valued at $1 billion. And I think all of these companies kind of like have in common that they raised a lot of money, which also is a proxy, of course, for fast growth and also traction, which does not necessarily mean that they will be super successful, but at least it's a good proxy. We have Agile Robotics, a company from Germany that's developing, or Germany and China, that's developing robotic arms and general purpose robot controller. Founded actually only 3.5 years ago. Also raised a really big round from SoftBank recently. In the 3D printing space, we have, for example, Desktop Metal, which is developing metal and carbon fiber 3D printers. They went public Q4 last year by the way of SPAC in the US. And then in the shop floor workflow area, we, for example, have Tulip, also a company from the US, founded in 2014. Also raised more than 150 million from pretty well-known investors, also from the US, like Inside Partners and NEA. What's common, unfortunately, for me as a European, a lot of these companies, as you can see, are from the US. We can have a separate discussion, maybe why this is the case. I really hope and I'm really cheering for every European founder that is building in a space that hopefully will have many logos on such a slide very soon. But I think in the US, at least what I know, and I think Helena also mentioned this, right? It seems like there's also a lot of capital available from US funds, even for this industry, which is sometimes ironic if you think about it, because I think this industry is kind of like probably one of the biggest contributors to GDP, for example, in Germany. So I think many of these companies actually should get built here in Europe or Germany. But it's just like a picture of what it is at the moment. And I think another interesting area is I talk a lot about startups and new companies, and of course, some of them will be really big and successful. But I think manufacturing is an industry where I think you also have other moving parts, right? On the one hand, you have the software and the cloud providers. I think especially Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are very, very interesting for the whole infrastructure play. I think Microsoft in general is doing a great job with Azure at the moment in the industry. They have really good distribution, right? I mean, I think most of the manufacturing companies, they're using Teams for communication now. They're using Office. So it's a well-known brand. And I think it will be really exciting to see what Microsoft will build in terms of infrastructure, IoT platform going forward. We'll also have the industrial software companies like Siemens, ABB, Honeywell, Schneider Electric, and others. I think also interesting in a sense because they know how to build software because they've built software in the past. Because what I'm also seeing is, yes, there's many manufacturing companies, traditional manufacturing companies that created machines so far. And for them, it's really, really hard going from building machines to building software. It's just very different, right? It requires different skills, different processes, different people. And I think it's probably easier for software companies to enter a new market, let's say for Microsoft or AWS manufacturing, than for a traditional manufacturer to become a software company. So in general, I think this will be a very interesting way to see who are the moving parties and how this will develop, for example, for the whole manufacturing analytics space in the next few years to come. And then, of course, there's all these startups that I just pasted in there as well. And I think what's good also, now we talk about the post-pandemic world. I mean, even though cases are spiking at the moment, I hope we can call it soon post-pandemic. The pressure to innovate, of course, has increased, right? The pressure to digitize and so on. And I just have a few examples here where I'm quite happy to see, there's more experimentation. Let's say larger and established companies are trying out new things. So we have, for example, BMW that's partnering with AWS to develop a cloud, to develop cloud-enabled solutions. We have Trumpf, a German manufacturing company that is basically trying to create a new business model, going from selling machines to selling paper part, actually. And they team up here with Munich Re and Relayer that Munich Re acquired. We'll also have manufacturing companies that make acquisitions. I think that's great for investors, but potentially also for the founders and the whole employees, right? Where there will be a lot of value created, hopefully. And we have ABB, for example, that acquired an autonomous mobile robot company with ASTI Mobile Robotics Group. And I think this happened just, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Here on the picture, you see Herbert Diess, the CEO of Volkswagen, and he had like a management meeting with, I think, more than 100 managers. And he basically invited Elon Musk to give a talk with him. And I like it as a sign or symbol because I don't know, a few years ago, if you would have imagined ever having, the CEO of like a very large German automotive company inviting actually the CEO of Tesla to give a talk in front of his or her managers. And so I think, you can say about Herbert Diess what you want, but I think he's definitely, doing things that are maybe a little bit unexpected or things people would have not thought about a few years ago. So I think it's just a good symbol to see how also things are maybe now changing, and people are not ignoring anymore, let's say, other companies, but actually trying to learn from others. And so just to summarize my key learnings from the last few years, remember the S-curve. So I think it's still very early when it comes to digital manufacturing. I think there's a lot of things that we have learned in the past few years, a lot of things that got developed, but it's still early. The pressure to innovate and to digitize has definitely increased, especially after COVID-19. I think we have a massive talent shortage in the industry, especially around digital talent. That's also one of the reasons why we're doing our course, actually, to help companies to upskill their employees. But I would also say that, there cannot be enough founders actually working on some of the problems here. I think a lot of education needs to be done on both sides, so both on the startup and the corporate side. I always thought, if both parties would have, similar expectations, similar processes, and maybe even sharing the same language, the industry as a whole would be much further ahead. I think very important to note in this industry, especially for young companies, distribution is so much more important than product. I never talked to any company in manufacturing where they struggled because of the product. It was usually go-to-market distribution. I think for corporates, talking to many C-level people and managers, innovation needs to be driven top-down and bottom-up. So it's super critical to have like a clear vision, a clear digital strategy for the company, but also a lot of empowerment for employees to experiment and to try things out. And that's kind of like something what I really would cheer for and hope for is, I think there were many painful learnings along the last few years, especially, around, let's say, the pilot purgatory. But I also want to see it positive and think, it probably will help all of us to move faster in the future. And I think, again, this report, for example, hopefully also, has some insights for all of us to see what actually is the potential, for example, for sustainability, what are companies working there, and how can we maybe move faster together. And with this in mind, I want to leave it to you guys. I think, we can criticize a lot and maybe, say, well, what didn't work well, but I think it's much more important for all of us, let's not look into what happened. Let's go invent tomorrow instead of worrying about what happened yesterday. That's how Steve Jobs said it once. So thank you very much for having me. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Here's my email, join our community, join our courses, or maybe ask me now if we have a few more minutes. But thanks again for having me and for doing this event.
Super. Thanks a lot, Robin. That was super insightful. I'd have one question. I mean, having seen the landscape, you had so deep insight into all different categories and how they developed over time. Why in the end did you decide, when you found your own startup, for this educational path, that is definitely not the one that is the easiest to scale?
That's a good question. I think for me, when I was talking to many people, especially on the corporate side, it's somehow ironic, but the whole theme came up again and again, right? It was like, yes, of course, Robin, we need new companies. We need new products. We need new services. We need to innovate. So software helps us, technology helps us, but actually the biggest bottleneck for us to move faster into the digital age is around the skill set and our people. And the problem is that due to, the macroeconomic, the hiring market, the labor market, it's super competitive. Everybody's competing for the same roles. It doesn't get bigger due to the age pyramid in Germany, for example. So the only way actually for them to stay innovative, to stay competitive, is by upskilling or even, reskilling part of their workforce. And it was just a problem I was hearing constantly, and I was thinking about myself. So I don't know, it doesn't feel like many people try to solve it at the moment. So maybe at some point I should do it myself. And so then I think everything got triggered over time. And maybe because my parents are both teachers, it also had an impact on myself. So everything comes together maybe now looking backwards. And it all makes sense, right? Looking backwards. I think if you would have asked me a few years ago, I would have never imagined that I basically go this path.
Great. No, I think also in our own interest, all the best with Aveo. I definitely hope that this will enter also in the stats next year or the year after as one of the growth categories. And thanks again for sharing your insights and your time.
Of course. Thank you very much.
Take care. So with that, we're going to turn immediately to the next presentation, and now really getting the expert view on trends, on the key findings of the report. And who else can present that better than actually the CEO of Dealroom? And with that, a warm welcome to Joram, and the screen is yours.
Great, thanks, Marie-Hélène. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so hi everyone. I am Joram, founder of Dealroom. Robin, thanks a lot for the presentation. I thought it was super interesting, and it fits really well into what I'm going to present. So together with Speedinvest, we were working on an overview of industrial tech. This is the second edition from last year. We were very fortunate to work with a couple of people from the industry, from ABB, Siemens, also Robin, Fabric Nano, Breakthrough Energy, Infarm, and of course Marie-Hélène and Lennart. So we identified 18 different core segments in industrial tech, which is 14 more than last year. So some of the new segments include workflow, project management, workforce management, engineering tools, after sales support. So yeah, all of this is in the full report, which is going live or has gone live today. So we covered in the report and we analyzed 685 European industrial tech companies, which at least 1 million in VC funding. So I'm going to just walk you through the highlights, and the full report is online. So I'll give an update on where in the S-curve we now are. Secondly, what are kind of some of the unique characteristics of industrial tech to be aware of compared with other startup sectors. And last but not least, talk a bit about the intersection between climate and industrial tech, which is huge. So starting with the industrial tech update, you can really see that industrial tech really kind of we called it a sleeping giant, awakening last year. Now it's really awakened. So the total value of the industrial tech ecosystem is 64 billion in Europe alone, and that's just measuring the enterprise value of startups or tech companies founded since 1990, VC-backed tech companies. The biggest is Celonis, which is now worth 10 billion. It's up 4.4 times in just 1.5 years. A bit less known is AutoStore, which was valued at 7 billion after a minority investment by SoftBank. Darktrace IPO'd this year, but also skyrocketed in value, now worth 6.5 billion. InPost, which is a Polish company, it was founded in 1999, it's in logistics, now valued around 6 billion. But also driving that record investment. So the total investment this year is probably going to hit somewhere close to 4 billion. It already stands at 3.8 billion, which is more than 2.5 times increase versus last year. And yeah, that's, as you can see, driven in part, but not completely, but in part by mega rounds. So you see the red part of the chart is rounds above 100 million. That includes Celonis, Sender, SendCloud, a couple of others. But also in exits, 2021 was a very active year. So the VC-backed exits in 2021 all industrial tech exits are worth 4 times more this year than all the 7 years before that. So that includes InPost, AutoStore, but also a couple of other exits. So it was a really a massive year in that sense as well, and of course the Darktrace IPO. There are also now 13 European industrial tech unicorns and 1 billion plus exits. So you see at the top the categories from procurement, robotics, logistics, cybersecurity, but also in a couple of other segments. So 13 unicorns. And then this chart shows where the most investment has been taking place and has been increasing. So logistics, procurement, security, and advanced materials are some of the hottest sectors where you see the biggest increase, the movement to the right. So this compares 2020 enterprise value with 2021. You can see cybersecurity tripling, quadrupling actually, some big increases. But across the board, most of these have been increasing quite significantly in just 1 year. One of the other big drivers has been investment coming from outside Europe, which is what you can see on the left. So the green part shows investment coming from the US and Asia. That's really been responsible for a lot of the increase. So I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's really good to have strong interest from Europe and or from outside Europe. But at the same time, I think it's important for European investors to keep up the pace so that there's a kind of good balance there. On the right-hand side, you see that the investment by investor type, and that's pretty normal balance, with corporates also significantly increasing their interest, but also venture capital increasing as well. By the way, I think from the corporate side, focus has been on energy, robotics, IoT, simulation, advanced materials, whereas the US and Asian money has basically increased across the board in all categories. Germany is still definitely in the lead, which is interesting. I think in most sectors, UK tends to be the biggest country, but in industrial tech it's kind of unique, where Germany and France are bigger, and they also have bigger manufacturing sectors than the UK. And also by number of unicorns, future unicorns, Germany is firmly in the lead. Then talking about tailwinds, challenges, some of the uniqueness of industrial tech. So a big tailwind last year, of course, has been COVID-19, and we talk more about it in the report. But 67% of manufacturers have accelerated adoption of digital technology because they felt like industrial agility became critical during COVID-19. Industrial tech is also at a much earlier stage of development, as Robin also mentioned, than other sectors. So you can see that on the left. So by amount invested, it doesn't. There are a lot of sectors that are much bigger. But if you look at the growth, industrial tech is one of the fastest growing sectors in terms of growth of investment, although it's of course from a smaller base. I saw one question. So the difference between corporate and corporate VC on slide 12. So corporate VC is really when the corporate has set up a separate investment vehicle, a separate fund, and corporate investment is directly invested from the balance sheet, but it's still a VC round. So the round is still a VC round, but the investment vehicle is different. So moving on. So I showed that industrial tech is a much younger ecosystem than the rest of the European startups. And on this first bar chart here, you can see that also the average VC funding per startup is a bit lower. But what's super interesting is to see that the percentage of VC-backed startups that become a future unicorn is actually a bit higher. And what we call a future unicorn here is a company that's not yet valued $1 billion, but it's already on its way to get there, and it's valued more than $250 million. And the chance to reach unicorn status or $1 billion plus exit is basically the same. I mean, the difference here is insignificant, and especially if you take into account that it's a younger ecosystem, I call that a draw. So I think that's really interesting. Something that's really unique about industrial tech is that there's a huge overlap with deep tech. So for us, the definition of deep tech is that a startup has not only product market risk, but also science and engineering risk. So there is a risk that the product doesn't even come off the ground. So there's kind of that double risk, and that's what we call deep tech. 69% of all the value created in industrial tech is coming from deep tech startups, whereas this is only 20% in the rest of the ecosystem. And on the right-hand side, you can see which areas that applies to. So like robotics, AR, VR, advanced materials, additive manufacturing, IoT, simulation, and some other categories. And we already know that deep tech has a kind of a longer funding cycle than a typical startup. And that also applies to industrial tech. So you can see on the right-hand side, we compare kind of the funding cycle of industrial tech with normal startups. It takes a bit longer to build. There are longer R&D cycles. So that kind of confirms the overlap also with deep tech and similarities. And as a result, and what you would expect to see is that a lot of industrial tech companies have their roots in academia. So that applies to Celonis, which has a link back to the Munich Technical University. Darktrace has a link back to Cambridge. And here you see a list of other big names where that also applies. And by the way, the Technical University of Munich is by far the biggest producer of kind of university affiliated deep tech startups. And so, yeah, you can see here in the numbers, so 32% of the enterprise value created comes from university spinouts, whereas this is only 6% for all startups. And I think that's a good thing because, yeah, if you see in the beginning, there's this R&D risk, engineering risk. It's a good thing that some of that risk can be supported by a university. So it's kind of de-risked by the time it exits the university life. Finishing off with like a topic really important also for Speedinvest and for us, the overlap with climate tech. We dedicated a chapter to it. So industry and logistics are responsible for 1/3 of all CO2 emissions. It's also about 1/3 of the economy. And if you include also agriculture and land use, which is kind of edge case or like gray area between industrial tech and waste, probably the contribution to CO2 is a lot higher. There's an inherent overlap between climate, deep tech, and industrial tech, and there are lots of areas where startups actually directly contribute to reducing and making industrial companies to basically accelerate their road to being a net zero contributor. And the report goes into detail about which companies there are and what they do. Investment into industrial climate tech companies is already at 1 billion, which is a record by far and an increase of more than 3 times. So it's growing even faster than the rest of the industrial tech ecosystem. There are lots of interesting insights from insiders. I wanted to give one quote from co-founder of Fabric Nano. Thought it's interesting. He's saying that especially lately, most major chemical manufacturers are interested in working with them on proof of concept biocatalysts. And those are companies that have never been made before using biology. So there's really like a mind shift going on in the last few months, actually. So Europe has said that it wants to be the first climate neutral continent, and so EU countries combined have committed over 2 trillion to build a greener, more digital Europe. It comes from different pockets, but this is money that all can eventually also benefit the ecosystem. At least 1/3 of this amount is directly targeted at making Europe greener. And there are many industrial startups that are directly addressing the EU's Green Deal categories. So there are 8 Green Deal categories. And for each of them, it's actually quite easy to list a number of industrial tech companies that that focus on those categories: zero pollution, smart mobility, biodiversity, etc. There's also a growing list of European climate-focused VCs that are also investing in industrial tech. And you probably have seen the news that there's a lot of new funds being raised that really focus on climate tech. And so there's a huge overlap there. So that really bodes well for the industrial tech ecosystem. That means there's fresh money coming in with a fresh perspective also on how to accelerate these companies. So that's it for the summary. There's more in the full report. You can get it from dealroom.co. If you want to also explore the underlying data used in the report, we have actually created a separate section on our database. It's on industrial.dealroom.co. There are lots of startups in there, and this is only going to grow in the coming months. So feel free to check it out. Thank you very much.
All right, Joram, many thanks. Thanks for sharing these insights. I think all of us are super excited to really see also what we've been feeling and hoping for in the past few years, to see data actually validating the growth of the segment. And also for me personally, I think we Germans, or my personal highlight was looking at the geographies of this vertical. I think we Germans love to complain as to where other markets and geographies keep overtaking us. So very exciting to see that Germany or DACH region is actually a pioneer also in this industrial tech world. Many thanks to you, Joram. It was great working with you, and also from the entire Speedinvest team. Many thanks to you and your team. Very much looking forward to collaborating again in the future. Let me take over from here. My name is, thank you, Joram. My name is Florian. I'm from Speedinvest, and we'll be guiding you through the next panel, where we will be discussing the topic of robotics. So you've just seen it, robotics being a core vertical that actually has grown significantly this year. I think last year was a combined enterprise value was shy of 4 billion, and now we're beyond 6 billion, driven by a number of follow-on investments, new players entering the market, and so forth. So this is what we want to discuss today. This is where we want to take a particular look. I have a number of super interesting guests joining us. I have Georg from Paua Ventures, I have Jordi from ABB, and I have Christian from Wandelbots. And I think everyone is live. I can see you here. Perfect. Welcome to the virtual floor. I think it's a really interesting combination between startup, investor, and obviously corporate side. I think a good start would be if every one of you could quickly introduce yourselves. We are fairly short on time, so I'd ask you to be very precise, maybe 30 seconds, very briefly saying, who are you? And also putting it into context of the company you're working for. What are you guys actually doing? Jordi, maybe you want to kick it off and share a few words about yourself.
Sure, Florian. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. My name is Jordi Artigas. I'm chief engineer for mobile robots with ABB in our R&D organization. I also have a position in the business unit as global technology manager for one of the business lines, which is called consumer segments and service robotics. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Thanks.
Thank you, merci. Welcome. Georg, you want to take over?
Perfect, yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Georg. I'm actually a mechanical engineer by training, later entrepreneur, and now investor. I'm partner with Paua Ventures. We're based in Berlin, and we are investing in early stage B2B tech companies, and we have been very active in the industrial tech investing space, especially robotics.
Thank you, Georg. And then finally, from the startup side, Christian, welcome.
So hi, I'm Christian. I'm CEO and co-founder of Wandelbots. We are a startup based in Dresden, And basically, we're building a software platform to take away heterogeneity of industrial robots and provide usability mechanisms to make robots basically accessible for everyone without any programming skills and without the necessity to kind of have a rocket science background in order to work with them.
Cool. Cool. Interesting. So very cool group of panelists. Again, super excited to have you here. Let's kick it off with a super generalist question. I mean, in light of a ongoing or soon to be over pandemic, we've seen several challenges and high implications on the way we work. And I think one really, previously unforeseeable situation was last year when partly workers couldn't go to factories or logistics workers couldn't attend their job basically. And this ultimately had the effect that factories and so forth had to stand still for some time. Open question into the room. And I think it would be interesting to have a short statement from all the panelists. In your perception, what do you think how COVID has actually had an implication on this area of robotics, specifically the need to automate and the need to use robotics? Maybe we just do a very quick round. Again, maybe whoever wants to start, George, if you have a few thoughts on this, I would love to get your opinion.
Well, yeah, thanks for that. So I think COVID showed a lot of things. Obviously, it put a lot of pressure on the market. We see a tendency of reshoring. We see a tendency of corporates wanting to make themselves independent from long supply chains. So I think we can expect a strong recovery in robotics growth in the next years. What we also have seen is resilience. So the overall robotic installation numbers have remained constant from 2019 to 2020. The IFR report was just published a week ago, I think, which is pretty impressive given that it was not easy times. But what for me is also very interesting is that if you look into the details, actually there's huge shifts that you can see. Like the overall numbers have been constant, but actually some industries have been declining a lot, like automotive. Like in Germany, for instance, the number of installations in automotive, robots in automotive have almost gone down to 50% from 2018 levels. But other industries have been growing a lot. So there's a lot happening in the whole electronics industry, but there's also shifts happening to new players, like e-commerce is growing a lot, food is growing a lot, and so on and so forth. And also, I think that was all with regards to industrial robots. I think what we also see is that service robotics, mainly mobile robots, are continuing to grow very, very quickly. And we will see very exciting years ahead with double-digit growth rates across the board.
Cool. Talking about growth rates, Christian, what's your take on COVID and its impact on robotics?
So it's not too easy to answer, right? So I think the short-term impact was quite negative because at the beginning, especially at large automotives, basically the tendency to do further investments in this time of high uncertainty, with a lot of people being responsible for automation and shop floors sitting at home, led to this short-term decrease basically in robot installations. However, at the same time, and this is what I put emphasis on, what George just said, is the, other industries are basically now speeding up in terms of robotic installations, which previously weren't too much known for adopting robots. And it's not only industries; it's especially company sizes. So for us, especially in the sector of small and medium-sized enterprises, so companies which are looking into which looked into robotics in the past over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, time over time, still haven't stepped into robotics yet, are now making this change. So we have many companies who are installing their very first robot right now. And I think this is changing the entire industry, because traditionally, and I would also like to hear Jordi's view on that, is that traditionally most of the big players in robotics, especially the robot OEMs, so the large ones like ABBs, they were highly focused on those large tier accounts, so especially in automotive sector, but also similar industries. And we have seen, and Robin talked a lot about this, about the challenges of deep tech startups in that sector. It's not too much on technology. It's not easy, but that's what we've got covered, but really to have a proven product market fit and then scale within a market is extremely challenging. And those, however, those large corporates, they have grown to big companies building structures which are focused on those industries, and now everything is changing. So those companies need to change as well. They need to change from their market approach, from their product offering, but also the types of companies they are addressing. So things change, and that's a good news.
Yeah, thank you. Jordi, what's your response to this?
My response is that yes, I agree. COVID has changed everything, and it has shifted robotics in a way. It has boosted the need for robotics in some specific sectors. For instance, in food processing plants, to avoid that food gets contaminated into the food, but also to avoid human-to-human transmission. This is a new trend that we are starting to see with some customers, which adds another driver for robotics and automation. So before, it was always mainly about cost and quality driven. Now there is another driver, which can potentially justify robots where probably before were not possible, thanks to these new requirements. Some examples are, quick service restaurants, dark kitchens, meat, cheese processing plants, slaughterhouses, for meat processing, deboning, cutting, and so on. But also in hospitals. I also checked the latest IFR report, and I was seeing that the field of disinfection robots has dramatically increased. Of course, after COVID and so on, this is quite natural. Robots mainly based on UVC light, right? A market of $700 million for this year with a CAGR rate of 35%. So we see in some areas that really, robotics is boosting a lot. There's a clear shift as well in some areas, right? And new challenges as well. So for instance, related to hygienic robots and so on.
Yeah, thank you for this. And I think this is a really nice transition. So I think many of what you've said, I've been hearing that actually COVID can act as quite an accelerator for robotics and actually also move players that have not been automating so far now to adopt robotics and automate their production. Let's take a closer look here and understand where we actually stand. I think, obviously in Germany, in Europe, we always talk about the big Mittelstand and when the time is going to come when they adopt. What's your take on this? Are we already at a point where currently robotics is widespread and can the German, Austrian Mittelstand company consider robotics a commodity, or what's your take on this? And I would be super interested also, Christian, maybe to hear your input on this. I think you feel pretty strongly about this. Where do we stand today?
Oh, right. So it's right at the beginning. So I wouldn't go any further than that, because just look at the numbers, right? Today we are talking about, depending on what types of robots you're counting in, but we're talking about somewhere between 3.5 to 4 million installed industrial robots globally, right? Compared to billions of PCs, compared to billions of mobile devices, that's nothing. If you draw both on the same curve, basically robotics still is a flat line. However, there is this potential to scale a technology like robotics to the same dimension as you see other devices, which are not necessarily only for private use. We all use smartphones, we all use PCs in our professional life, and the same is with robots on the long run. However, in order to foster that, to facilitate that, right, a lot of technology innovation, decrease of pricing, lower the barrier of entry. There are a lot of things have to come together, and I think this will only be possible if we build technology that is enabling this huge workforce, which today it still works at companies like Google, at Netflix, and so on, to bring in their creativity and innovation also to the sector of robotics. So especially, and going back now to small and medium-sized enterprises, They are now starting to install their first robots. Of course, the larger German Mittelstand, so small and medium-sized enterprises, they use robots here and there, but it's nothing close to their full potential. And maybe an additional remark, because so there are those crazy numbers from the World Economics Forum, et cetera, that by 2025, a quarter of all jobs in manufacturing can be automated. That's all bullshit. So we are less than 1% of all manufacturing positions globally being automated today. So there is a huge room to grow. However, this must be flexible, it must be cheap, and must be accessible for the people. And I think a lot more has to come in order to really speak of mass adoption on the SME side.
Got it. You've mentioned one interesting point, and that is basically the maturity of technology. Something I think personally think is super interesting. The question as to, is the technology at a point in time where it really enables, wide adoption, additional technologies, and so forth. So Jordi, maybe you can share your perspective from ABB. I think you guys have quite some interesting overview on, the state of technology, on wider adoption, looking at this big vision of, having a software-based platform, that is the baseline for all robotic applications. Are we at this point yet? Is this mature enough to enable these other use cases and technologies, or what do you think where we stand here?
So at ABB, we understand robots as platforms. In fact, our portfolio is built on three main platforms: the actual robot manipulators, right? The new mobile robots area after the ASTI acquisition that you may have heard of, and what we call the smart systems, right? So platforms are built on the basis of modularity, just like many years ago in the automotive industry. So corporate companies in robotics were applying similar strategies to enhance the production of our robots. So robots today and applications are built upon modular blocks, and we understand applications, for instance, in logistics, as a combination of different Lego bricks, right? That we combine, that we glue together through software, of course, with standardized interfaces to bring new value. And yeah, maybe I think so. Also answering to the previous question, right, on commodities, right? So I truly don't think that robots are becoming a commodity. Maybe some applications are becoming slowly a commodity. Like if you take palletizing robots, right? That's a robot that it's doing palletizing, and it has been there already for many years, and probably we can only compete on price on that. But robots, they are adding a lot of value constantly, right? And thus, I think this really goes against the idea of that robots are becoming a commodity. Huh?
Yeah. George, I think you wanted to say something here.
Yeah, exactly. So I fully agree with what Christian and Jordi said. In the end, I think we are still at a very early stage in the whole robotics market. This is also why I'm very bullish about the field. I mean, if you think about it now, one robot per 100 workers, more or less, that's the global average. Obviously, in some countries it's more advanced, but that's the average. And I think some parts might be a little bit commoditized, but a robotic cell is a complex system. Like it's an interface of many parts. You have an arm, you have a gripper, you have a conveyor system, you have a vision system, you have a software, and so on and so forth. And the problem is complexity is still extremely high. And this is also the case why most robots today get sold via integrators that need to stick all of that together. And in the end, most installations are prototypes that get done one time for one customer in one specific way, which is totally not scalable. And this is also why SMEs have not picked up on robotics, because mainly the big corporates can afford that. They can afford big automation teams, and they can afford all of these investments, and they have high cycle times, and they have basically produced the same parts over and over again. So for them, it's easy. But the SMEs are 2/3 of our economy. So I think now with all these modularity, standardization, and platform approach, I think robotics will really push into SME, and this will be the biggest growth driver in robotics that we will see. And even now the growth rates are good. So we expect like an industrial robots growth rates of 13% this year. As Jordi said, in service robotics, it's even 30%. It's very healthy growth rates, but still it's from a very small base. And I think we will see a lot of more growth to come.
And
I was just going to ask.
I would like
to
add up on one thing Jordi was just mentioning, which is the whole idea of modularity, standardization on platforms, right? Because this is directly why our company exists in the first place. So what we are building basically is for the very first time to have a high performance software platform where you can basically teach, program, and control and operate and maintain robots over one standardized interface, independent on the hardware manufacturer, independent on the control system underneath. If we are talking about modularity and standardization for the end user, this goes beyond the barriers of individual manufacturers, right? So today, if you use a printer, you don't care whether that printer is from Epson or Canon or whomever. Most of the people don't even know where their printer is, who's basically the producer of the printer. You have a standardized plug and play driver system. You have a standardized printing dialog, and all the magic happens in the operating system underneath to communicate with the peripherals. That does not exist in robotics whatsoever. So there was ROS, or there is ROS, which is highly academic driven, but still not suitable for high performance industrial applications due to many limitations. And what basically led to this hyper growth of PCs, for example, was the software layer, which basically standardized interaction, which brought in a mouse as a standard basically interaction device, and basically taking away this barrier of dealing with many different devices with many different configurations and this individual customization. So what Microsoft did was basically turning a machine which was mainly used by military research and some nerds into something which went to every company in every home. And robotics has the same potential, and I think we need to all together work on ways to make this happen. That is basically the way forward. And this will foster a completely different type of adoption of robotics. I think a growth no one can anticipate today.
Yeah. Hey, and maybe directing this directly to Georg. I mean, we've been mentioning, a lot of opportunity around the area of robotics, and I mean, we have, a COVID accelerating it. We have strong technological developments, and we have customers who want to automate. And nonetheless, taking a high-level perspective on the ecosystem, so the startup ecosystem, we still lack, the number of unicorns or super successful scale-ups that we see in other deep tech verticals. Is it the lacking modularity? Is it the lacking firepower of SMEs, or what do you think? Why this is? Why are we still also, here at the beginning in terms of startup funding, startup exits, and so forth?
Good question. I think we will get there, but I think the overarching problem is complexity. It's a very, very complex market. And I mean, you have a hardware complexity, you have AI involved, you have vision systems, you have software, and no company in itself can be like perfect at all of these things. So I think what we need to get more unicorns is we need a couple of strong platform unicorns emerging, probably one or a few on the software side and probably also one or a few on the hardware side. There is no Apple iPhone of robotics that is completely open and modular. So we need this, I think we need this carrier rocket, this master rocket that pulls a whole ecosystem up, like around Salesforce, an ecosystem was evolving of a lot of very successful startups, or around Shopify, or around Apple, obviously, as well. So I think we are still waiting for this carrier rocket. And for me, the main missing part is platform and standardization, both on the software side and also on the hardware side.
Got it. Got it. Super interesting discussion points. Maybe very quickly, and this would go towards Jordi and Christian. I think one challenge that you also see around industrial startups, specifically robotics, is the cooperation between the startup and the corporate, right? So one being by nature super fast and dynamic, and the other, naturally slower and more process driven. And we often observe this as a key bottleneck. Robin has previously been talking about the pilot trajectory. Do either of you have any recommendations for robotic startup entrepreneurs in the panel, in the audience? Is there anything that they should follow or do and implement in order to overcome this gap between the two?
So, Jordi, you want to go first, or
I can start if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first of all, great question, Florian. I really think that collaboration between corporates and startups is crucial. Really, and I see it from ABB. Innovation can be drastically boosted through a good combination between organic and inorganic development, right? And that can lead to different types of partnerships, collaborations, acquisitions, and so on. Startups must take the risks that corporates are reluctant to take. For instance, all the progress that we've been seeing in logistics, in picking robots, right, that are based in vision and AI, this all emanates from startups. So to your question, my recommendation is that startups, first of all, they need to be also customer-centric. At corporates, this is very clear to us, but I see that in some startups, that is sometimes not so clear. And really focus on the core aspects. Don't try to do everything. If there's anything that is not adding value, that is not core, just externalize if it's possible, and also keep it simple. Keep it simple, and then come to ABB and get in touch with us, of course.
All right. So what I would like to add is and this also adds to what Georg just said. For one of the main challenges for any robotic startup on this planet is complexity, and also not necessarily only the technical complexity, but also the complexity of the established market mechanisms. What startups drive very quickly is with their naivety is to basically challenge state of the art and basically just do things differently. I think, however, I've seen in the 3.5 years of Wandelbots, I have seen always the same scheme, is that once you collaborate with large corporates, especially in Europe and especially in Germany, there is a lot of those people which are complaining that you would say that the fish is not able to climb a tree. So you have to start somewhere, and you're starting one problem. And of course, then people start try to find the limits of technology, and then basically use that to promote their more conservative mindset. And at the same time, startups need to work with established corporates. That's absolutely required. If you build something in the lab, it will never work in reality. I don't have the silver bullet solution. What we have established and what works quite well for us is to move, especially at the beginning, when we brought our technology first to the market, is to step from POC to what we call POV, so a proof of value, to really define what the counterpart is expecting right from the beginning, to define a benchmark before you even start working together, and to really have that documented, to also define what happens after that is successful. But with just working in the lab and not bringing your technology out to the wild, to the field, you're going nowhere.
Yeah, thank you. Fully agree. And I think many of what you just said actually applies also to the broader, set of industrial startups as opposed to only robotics, I guess. All right. Unfortunately, we've come to the end already. So I have a bunch of remaining questions open. What I would like to do one more iteration, asking you, what is your big bet? What's a technology or trend that you're super excited about that's coming up? I would really ask you to nail it down to 1 or 2 sentences, but I think all of you are uniquely positioned to have a particular overview of the market. So what's the tech or use case or approach that you think, you know, has a bright future within the next few years? George, if you want to pick it up from the investor's point of view, where's the next unicorn?
It's as I said, I will try to make it brief. It's not so easy to make this question brief, but platform, I think, is the headline. Again, I think on the software side, Wandelbots and what Christian is doing, but also what other companies are doing, they have a great shot. On the hardware side, there's also great companies like CoboWorks, which is a company that we backed, is doing a great job there. But I think beyond the platform word, I think what is big trend is connectivity, like 5G will change a lot. Also industrial cloud will change a lot. Like that's a very important headline. And then the last headline that is important for me is collaboration. Like right now, collaborative robots really don't exist. Like nobody uses a UR, or 9 out of 10 URs don't get used in a collaborative environment. Why is that? Because industrial safety is a big problem. So advanced safety technology, advanced sensor technologies will really allow robots to work collaboratively next to humans, which will also be a big growth driver. Those are the 3 things for me.
Thank you. Jordi, from your side?
Yes, I would say there are a few well-known trends that we can quickly summarize. So
the biggest bet, the biggest trend, which one is it?
I'd say
the single one to bet on?
E-commerce, personalization. If you take those 3, you know, this all leads to something which is still quite new in robotics, which is the capability to deal in unstructured environments, you know, environments in which things are not known or hard to model, right? And that they can be dynamic, like in logistics, in service robotics, in healthcare, right? And to enable these kind of new skills, what do we need? It's clear, right? We need very advanced vision and perception capabilities. We need artificial intelligence, of course. We need enhanced motion, right? So when the robot moves, we need to make sure that it will not collide against objects or against humans. We need the robots to be collaborative, right? We need to make them smarter, in essence. Huh? And for that, we also need, of course, connectivity, like 5G. Try to put as much intelligence as possible in the edge or in the cloud to reduce hardware complexity on premise, and so on. These trends, technological trends, are key to enable this, you know, ability to deal in unstructured environments. And I think this is one of the key takeaway messages.
Christian, will you be picking up any of these ideas, or what do you think is the next big thing?
The next big thing in robotics definitely is software, stupid as it sounds, because basically a robot by itself is just like metal and gears and drives and a little bit of electronics. But what makes a robot do something is software. Robots are programmed with software more than 30 years now. However, I think especially people coming from other industries, what you would understand in terms of software and what typically would be understood in terms of software in the robotics world is something different. And I can only say yes to everything Jordi just said. So technical advancements on the robotics side, we're being able to deal with unstructured environments, pushing AI to have this level of abstraction in terms of AI models you need to have in order to make a robot apply previously learned knowledge to new environments. This is all true. But the key enabler which will drive real softwareization of robotics, things that will foster AI and bring in this whole workforce, is connectivity. This is the thing that will change everything. Having modern. So today, if we deploy our software solution to a customer, we ship a damn fucking eyepiece. So basically a big box which you connect to the machinery in some cabinet, because in most of the companies, it's not easily possible to basically deploy software in modern ways to collect data. So I would argue that ABB doesn't really know what their robots are doing. They might know the vast majority of companies where their robots are deployed, and they might have also an overview on application cases, but they don't really know what they're doing. Neither are most of their customers. To really connect robots, to be able to deploy software easily, to put services on top, and really collect meaningful data in a way that we can apply it for AI, this will change everything.
Yeah. I think so many things. I think the last point that you've been mentioning just now, I think this also screams for, you know, this idea of collaboration between startups and between corporates. So many things at this point. This is exactly the topic that we will be discussing in the next session. So many thanks, Georg, Christian, and Jordi. I'm now welcoming Andrew to the stage, who actually has a background from ABB himself. He has been leading corporate startup collaboration at ABB previously, and is currently a managing director at Woodside Capital. So he will be talking about this idea about corporate startup collaboration. Many thanks to everyone who participated in this panel.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you, Florian. I think I'm already sharing my screen. Great speeches and a great panel. I've been listening in and watching with great interest, and I hope to be able to build on the conversation this afternoon. As Florian said, I've been a industrial tech specialist for about 25 years now. I've been a technology consultant. I've been a chief technology officer for an industrial automation part of ABB. I've been involved with venturing at ABB. I'm now a managing director at a Woodside Capital Partners, Silicon Valley-based company that specializes in helping tech startups raise money and sell themselves, often to corporates. I myself specialize there very much in the area of industrial tech. So it's a big honor to be here this afternoon for us in Europe, the morning for those in Asia, or the evening for those in Asia, and the morning for those in the US. So thank you. I'm going to talk about the intersection of corporates with industrial tech, with startups, and we've touched on some of the ideas. I'm going to focus not on robots, but on what tech are we giving to deskless workers, to service workers, to remote workers, to help them get better at their jobs, more efficient, and to deliver new value propositions. I'd like to come back, perhaps, to think for a minute about German's Mittelstand. I think it's a great example, and I'm often advising corporates on their digital transformation journey and the strategy that they're following and how to work with startups. And many corporates understand well the need to get out there in the market and find out what's needed when defining their strategy. But something which is often overlooked is also to look internally and to figure out what are your core strengths, what are your core assets as a corporation, and how can we build upon those, and how can we protect those? And if we think about German Mittelstand or industrial companies with a long heritage, what they've got that's perhaps more tangible than just a heritage is they've got a very large installed base of equipment, typically. And this installed base has been deployed over decades. And because this equipment is extremely reliable and robust, much of it is still operating. This installed base, of course, is the basis for a very profitable and often fast-growing recurring service business. Service margins are typically higher compared to new equipment sales. They're easier to grow, and so this should be a very core pillar of the strategy of any industrial company. Of course, you can use new technology to deploy traditional services more efficiently and more cost effectively. You can also use new technology to deliver new services via disruptive business models and add new value streams. So we have companies with large installed bases, potentially lucrative service revenues. And we also have the fact that emerging competitors, perhaps from low-cost countries, they can come in and undercut new product price, but they cannot replicate the decades-old installed bases. And so what we need to ensure is that these companies have the people well-trained, well-skilled, the right tools and the right processes to service these installed bases in a cost-effective but innovative manner. Corporates can do some of that themselves, but almost certainly not all of it. They do need to partner to deliver some of that innovation. Some of those partnerships may be with bigger companies, Azure we mentioned, but certainly I think that in order to ensure there's real innovation, we also need partnerships with startups. So some of the changes that we've got going on, we've got an aging workforce. There's a lot talked about this in Germany, so especially in terms of service workers who are often remote. That workforce is getting older and they're getting harder to replace, and they tend to have a lot of years of experience. We see this as well in the utility sector in the US. And it's difficult to find replacements that have the same level of skills and experience, fairly obviously. But we can find replacements, although not as many as we would like, that are more digitally savvy. So this is the perfect opportunity to as we heard in the first talk, to upskill, to train, but also to provide on the job digital tools to replace some of that tacit experience, and obviously collecting the knowledge of the retiring workforce and recycling it, reusing it, but in a digital format for the newer workforce is key. As we already mentioned, we need service organizations to do more with less, but they also need to generate new revenue streams. And I produced a report earlier this year on industrial Internet of Things, and I'm now doing some new research into startups in this area. We call it the industrialization of service, or digitalization of service, or the deskless workforce. You know, a lot of the startups that I'm looking at in this sector, you know, they are focused on industry, but you also start to see that a lot of the tools and services that are offered are also very applicable to actually a broader range than just what we'd probably call industry. So you see construction is also served by some of these startups, but also home service businesses. So people who come to do plumbing or even fix the washing machine. Some of this stuff is also applicable to medical and healthcare frontline workers. So quite quickly we can see that some of these startups have got a much bigger total available market than even just industry, which is big itself. So certainly music to the ears of venture capitalists, I hope. So just to talk through a few of a few of these on the screen. Invixium, that's all about access control, making sure that only the right people are allowed to, on certain areas of a plant or a site, able to recognize, do facial recognition with a mask. So A, are you wearing a mask? And B, I can still tell it's your face when you've got a mask on. Very big sector, and it's also been raising a lot of capital in recent years, is worker, job, and kind of route scheduling, how to manage and best optimize that large mobile deskless workforce. Many companies in there that have raised hundreds of millions. I've just put one here. We've got companies that are trying to automate customer support for industrial equipment. You know, how to YouTube video, like how to fix things yourself, or if that's not possible, get on the phone with someone remote. Companies that are making it easier for workers who are hanging off a wind turbine to communicate with one another. Also, this company Hardline, you know, when you speak, everything is transcribed as well into text, so you can read later on what has been written. Again, many companies in knowledge management, so helping companies, you know, micro learning. We heard from Aveo earlier, a big topic, and also companies that provide digital workflows, so provide instructions on mobile devices that help service workers complete tasks on a step-by-step basis. Safety, another big topic. You know, where are workers? How close are they to one another? Are they keeping their distance? Are they keeping the distance from known risks on a construction site or on a factory? When an emergency happens, how do we know if all the workers are safe? Tool tracking with Xerify, particularly critical in the area of aerospace and medical. In both those cases, once you've finished a job, you need to be absolutely sure that every tool you used on that job is back in the box and not still stuck inside the item or even the person that you were repairing. So a growing use for an interesting use case for, you know, RFID, which is, you know, in some areas a commodity technology. Moving on to natural language processing, couple of still early but very promising companies right here in the DACH region working on this. You know, you can call up Siri and, you know, using some pretty regular speech, get a song you want played on your phone. And now with these kind of tools, you can ask for, you know, how can I repair a pump? What do I need to do with the bearing? What's the pressure? In very normal ways, you can ask a question and get answers back, which you know, and the information that those answers use is found by sorting through, you know, truckloads of traditional manuals. So again, very easy to save time and to ensure a much higher percentage of repair first time. We heard a little bit earlier about the dream of, you know, augmented reality glasses. What I would say is that dream is starting to become a reality. I found a number of companies, and in fact, it is being seen that the first real commercial use cases for augmented reality glasses are in the industrial sector. The glasses are getting, you know, lighter weight and soon will look exactly like a regular pair of spectacles. But at the same time, the software that powers those glasses and the ease in which applications can be made is rapidly enhancing. So I think we're pretty much there now, and we're going to see some high growth and well-funded companies in the AR industrial kind of hands-free guidance sector. And then, of course, there are other companies that do away with the AR headset altogether and just use light and instructions beamed onto the workpiece to perform a very similar role. I'd like to perhaps build a bit on my final slide here. Come back a little bit to the ideas of pilot purgatory and how to collaborate, how corporates should collaborate with startups on my final slide. Certainly, I fully agree with everything that has been said on the topic of pilot purgatory. I don't mention those words here, but certainly, you know, some do's and don'ts that go around that topic. You know, corporates should experiment, and a number of those experiments should be done with startups. And we hear the expression fail, you know, often and fail fast. But the second part of that phrase is perhaps more important, that when you don't fail, when you have success, you have to be ready to scale up quickly. And this is certainly one of the key solutions to the pilot purgatory problem. You have to, both the startup and the corporate have to agree in advance. And we heard a little bit this in the last session. Very important to have an agreement in advance. How long is the pilot going to take? And I advise as short as possible. You know, a month is good, less is even better. What does success look like, and what are we going to do if the pilot is successful? If it's not successful, we're both going to stop. It's going to be good for the startup and it's going to be good for the corporation. But if we do have success, let's not delay. Let's scale up. Certainly, startups and corporations, they work on different timelines, and there's going to be a need for some, you know, consolidation. I would advise, you know, corporations to learn from the speed and agility of startups, and to start to try to deliver their own new products in timelines that were otherwise unheard of. Also, very important, often startups are very successful, or can be successful, at getting a very high-level sponsor within a corporation. That's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You also need to find people lower down in an organization who you can talk to on a week-by-week basis, who are motivated to work with startups, intrinsically motivated, and want to see the partnerships succeed, and are very far away from not invented here thinking. It may take a little bit of trial and error to find those people, but startups do need to make that effort. Finally, I would like to come back to the topic of culture, which we also just discussed, and you know, it's linked to diversity. Startups who work with corporations, that's one form of diversity. There are of course other forms of diversity, but we've learned to understand and believe that diversity is important. It creates diversity of thought and diversity of thinking, you know, increases our chances of success. So startups and corporations, yeah, they're going to have different cultures, different languages, different processes. That is going to lead inevitably to some conflicts. What I would finish by saying is, yeah, that is diversity, and that is the point. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Really, really interesting. And I think everyone enjoyed that really much. can totally agree with everything you said, specifically about different cultures and between startups and corporations. I mean, we see that secondhand as an investor very regularly. So couldn't agree more. In the interest of time, I would refrain from asking various follow-on questions that we see here. Everyone who is interested to ask a question, please reach out to Andrew directly. I think the email is available here, and we will also send it around afterwards. Cool. Okay, so I don't know how about you, but I'm super excited about everything we've heard so far and about the cool speeches and panels we had so far. We come to the last agenda point of this event now, which is the second panel. Also with a very cool group of people, and this time touching on a slightly different topic, but nonetheless equally important, which is also being touched upon by our industrial tech report, which is the topic of sustainability. So I would like to welcome Claire, Jacob, and Lluís to the board. Claire is a founder of OneFive. Jacob is the founding partner of 2150, a VC that's focused on sustainability and impact investments. And Lluís is a sales VP at Procter & Gamble. But I will also hand the mic over to you, Claire, and the others to quickly introduce yourself.
Good evening. I'll start because I guess I'm top of the list there. Hi, I'm Claire. I'm one of the two founders of 1.5. We are a biomaterials discovery and development company working on developing new packaging materials, circular materials for the FMCG space. Thank you for having me.
Super excited to have you. Jacob.
Thank you. Great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. And I'm Jacob, and I'm part of a new fund called 2150. We just finished our raise and doing our sixth investment in what we like to call a confluence of climate tech and urban tech investing. So we focus on decarbonization and creating sustainability while we continue to like power civilization through powerful urbanization trends that we think will continue for the next decades. So that's us.
Welcome, super cool to have you. Last but not least, Lluís, please.
Hey, thank you. I'm Lluís, I'm working for P&G. I'm the team leader for the Metro account. As a second hat responsibility, I'm also dealing to really bridge that gap that we have spoiled today on the purgatory, pilot purgatory. Okay, so trying to see how we can collaborate closely and faster with the startups in order to solve for our biggest challenges. So that's it.
Cool. Welcome as well. Yeah, so we have seen and learned a lot of different topics today, from the general state of industrial tech in the European ecosystem to robotics, and then towards collaboration between startups and corporates already. Moving it more into the discussion point of sustainability, my question directly to Jacob would be, we also see in the report that more than 30% of global emissions are actually created by industry and industry-related processes like logistics. And on the one hand, that obviously creates a huge potential for industrial climate tech companies and tech startups. But on the other hand, many of these startups oftentimes aren't really the classic VC cases that VCs are used to invest in, simply because they oftentimes entail above average levels of hardware or material usage. So my question to you would be, do you see investors adopting? Do you think they have to adopt, and are they adopting fast enough?
That's a very big question, full of a lot of, I think, interesting dynamics. Well, overall I would say yes, but I think the way we see it, the way I see it, is that I think there's increasing professionalization and maturation of venture in general, and I think that it's creating a more clear division of labor sometimes, not everywhere, but in certain areas. I think we need to think about it like that. So you have division of labor across stages, you have division of labor across sectors, usually in venture and geographies. And I think that, I mean, a lot of the new funds that are coming out now, I think if you want to have relevance in the world of venture where capital is abundant and you know, entrepreneurs, at least the best ones, they can pick and choose, right? You need to have a specialty. You need to have a focus. I think that specialization, that division of labor is something I believe very much in, and that's what we try to do with our slice of the opportunity and the problem, you can say. I also think that within our domain, that we have to kind of think back to some of the difficult long-term industries with scientific risk and hardware and production and lots of different things like biotech or others that have, they have succeeded on the venture model before, but there was like a slightly different division of labor and pathway compared to consumer tech or fintech, like the kind of like the easy categories we've seen proliferate over the last 10-15 years. So I think we're getting a little bit back to basics, and so we like to, and we try to find those very early stage, knowledgeable, very deep investors who can manage that scientific risk, for instance, of something which is hard or scientific industrial, which it often is, and then when we get to the point where it becomes like really about commercial scaling up, maybe like the first pilot plant has maybe already been established, and now you're moving more towards the commercial scale, right? Then a lot of other questions come up, and the approach we've taken as a fund actually overall is to see if we could, in our investor base, amongst our LPs, actually bring some of the knowledge in, some of those strategic partners that might be relevant in terms of knowledge, understanding problems, being able to open pockets of growth for companies. So we try to have them in, but we also try to, see if we can bring other investors to the table. So we have this combination of all the different knowledge pieces you need to do these things that are really hard. And I don't know much about building factories or running them or financing them. I know a few people who do, so we ask them. Ideally, I'd like to have a co-investor who has that capability. If I'm now looking at a company where we are doing, I don't know, trying to turn some kind of like material into some kind of other material, or some kind of like that production facility to scale that up, right? I need someone to invest with who has skin in the game, who knows how to do that and can actually become a customer as well. I think there's a big question and a big challenge around this kind of project and capex finance and capability to bring that to the startups at the right time. So we try to bring people along with us, or through as investors or co-investors, to bring that knowledge and capability to the teams, because we don't have it, but we know it's necessary, and it's not been fully solved, but we see some cases where it works out.
Cool. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And maybe a critical question also. Do you think venture capital in the impact space has to be more patient, or is that something that will also change, and the fruits that you can harvest from that down the line will be even greater?
Well, I think in some cases you need to be very patient. I mean, I've done a Series A round this year of a 15-year-old company, right? So some people were very patient with that company until they came to this point where everything was ready, including the world, to receive it and adopt it at scale. And so I think you need a lot of patience sometimes. But I think you need to pick your space, right? And if you can raise 2 billion and have a 20-year fund cycle, and you can hire like a cross-functional team of PhDs like Breakthrough Energy, I mean, you can do a lot of different things, right? But we like to co-invest at the sort of like in the last 10 years of the life cycle of some of those companies, and not in the first 10 years, because we cannot handle that, unfortunately, not yet. So I think it's about the tactics in that. But I think there are great investors kind of coming out on all these different parts of the journey increasingly, and there's just like a lot of demand in the capital markets, and there's a lot of capital formation for these topics, and there's a lot of regulatory framework changing. It's almost like nothing was happening for a long time, or it was very grassrooty, and it feels like, and then all of a sudden it's like it's an exponential takeoff moment, at least for some topics, and I think in industry and in sustainability. And I think that's an amazing time to be an investor in this domain.
Cool. Like to hear that a lot. Okay, so maybe moving on to the startup side and Claire. So if we think about tech companies in the climate tech space, what, to your opinion, is the thing that is most needed for these young companies today to make a dent in the fight for climate change? Is it saying anything, right? Is it simply capital? Is it corporate awareness? Or is it also to do with aligning the even more complex stakeholders of oftentimes really science than entrepreneurs and investors all at one table?
I mean, picking up from what Jacob mentioned earlier, I probably kind of align with two points that he raised. I mean, we need capital first and foremost. You're trying to move industries that are in a state of this is a word that a customer used the other day, inertia, right? Like there's a huge amount of force and momentum that's needed to, particularly in the packaging space, to move these players out of, let's call them a state of relative inactivity, right? They all know that they should be moving. They've all set really ambitious goals for 2030, but the momentum just isn't there yet, even though the will is. And so I think capital is a huge way to create that momentum, that force that kind of drives people to do more, take in more risk. The risk or the appetite for risk, of course, isn't coming from the existing players. I think it's well suited to come from the VC space and from startups, because that's it's the day-to-day business. You're in the risk game. You know exactly how to place a good bet. I would argue larger incumbents like your SIGs of the world, they're not looking to take huge risks in the same ballpark as other VCs. And then secondly, I think also, climate tech companies require space. We're working in a space of we're in an area of flux, regulation and 15 years of change. It's all happening all of a sudden. Things are changing so quickly now. Everybody's coming and saying, plastic bad, you need to do this and all of these things. The single-use plastic directive comes in, but you have to appreciate it took them 2 years to get it to a place where now, so it's been enforced for 2 years. But for Germany, for example, we've adopted the directive 1-to-1. So the wording and the formulation is exactly how it was from the European Union. There's very little input for a company to say, all right, well, what am I really meant to do with this? How do I turn this into something that I can tell my R&D team, don't do this, do that, because in future this will be illegal, or I won't be able to sell this on the market anymore using the same claims that I have done previously. And that level of detail doesn't come in until a few years after, which means a lot of packaging peers that we have, startups especially, but also existing players, they're trying to figure out what exactly am I doing? How do I interpret this? Where am I placing my bets? Because I need to make sure I'm future-proofing my business. And this is a huge amount of brain work, mental capacity that's required, especially for startups who don't have all of the people in the background in these huge teams that have been working with this day to day for the past decades. So one thing that we've really seen is that giving ourselves and giving our team the space, the mental headspace, just to think about things and to say, all right, well, if I have to future-proof somehow, what are the bets I can place? That's been hugely beneficial to us, and also something that I think a lot of players don't have within their own functions, right? They have day-to-day business, they have petroleum-based products that they still need to sell, they have innovation that they still need to place. They have prioritizations and things going on, and often they just don't have the mental capacity, nor really the mental capacity to think about what's this space going to look like in 10 years or above. They've set goals for sure, but that's kind of different to then asking yourself, how do I actually implement that into existing projects or existing initiatives? And I think that's somewhere where the startup space can kind of be a nice augmentation to the core business functions that you have in these larger companies, because we have the headspace, we have the capital. Our job is to say, where am I placing my bets so that I'm still here in 10 years? So our job is to think that far ahead. And so I think that's actually a nice way to balance out, let's say, the timelines that existing corporates are currently dealing with, because we can be the ones to take your, the crazy ideas, the crazy wishes, and see how do I turn them into something that becomes a reality in 10 or 15 or 20 years. So I think those are kind of capital and space would be the two main aspects that I would focus on if I had to create a wish list.
Cool. What about the others?
So from our side, I think that it's all about the collaboration, no? And trying to have those partners that can help us solve for the big challenges. So I think that we have done a pretty long journey in terms of innovation, and we started as most of the other corporates looking for the shiny objects. I think that we have advanced a bit, and now we are kind of defining what are those big challenges, what are those business opportunities that we need to define, and then trying to bring them outside to find the right partners and to collaborate together to solve for them. Okay, and that's what we have been focusing lately on. How do we reinforce those processes to really support those startups, no? And in line with what we have been saying and seeing today, how we can support them by making it easier from a purchasing standpoint, so avoiding those 20 pages contracts, bring it back to 2 pages contract. How do we ensure we can pay them in 10 days instead of 60 days? So how do we bring that collaboration really efficient, and how do we bring that collaboration from a paid pilot into a scale, no? And that's our kind of a big challenge. How do we maximize the scale?
Exciting. Okay. And maybe can you share a bit more context on Procter & Gamble's situation as a corporate? What is Procter's biggest challenge at the moment with regards to sustainability, and maybe also where do you see can startups particularly support very well, and where it might be harder for startups?
So in general, when we talk about innovation, there are many different vectors of efforts, no? So from buying to developing venture capital efforts to what the current vector that I'm leading, which is more on how do we collaborate with the startups in many different aspects. Okay, so we need a president support in order to define what's the business challenge, and from there we share with our startup community what is a brief with this public brief, so non-confidential brief, stating what's the current issue and how we do solve for them. And I tell you, so 90% of those briefs are related to industry tech, and lately I would say that more than half of them are related to sustainability issues, so linking from packaging to advanced materials to energy efficiency. So the last 2 briefs that I shared a couple of weeks ago with our partners, so including Speedinvest and Paua and other partners in Berlin, were linked to how do we limit those losses of thermal energy in our industrial manufacturing places. So those are super hot topics, and it can really be about any of the different aspects in the industry processes. No, I think that it goes, the sustainability aspect or the climate aspect goes in many different aspects that can be a super long list.
Okay. What about if we talk about the whole topic a little bit more in general, so not specifically for Procter & Gamble, but for other parts of the industry or industrial tech, climate tech topics. So part of our report also highlights actually that we see climate tech solutions in very different areas. So everything from advanced materials, like for example 1.5, all the way to robotics, biomanufacturing or simulation even. Maybe Jacob, do you see other areas which you are particularly bullish about when it comes to climate tech startups?
We see a lot of areas. There's actually a lot going on, and for us, since we have like a focus mandate, but it's also in a sense very broad, because the urban economy is maybe 80% of GDP, so, and 70% of emissions, then we try to zoom in where the problem is actually most material, and where we can then also like add value besides just investing. So we really try to start with the problem and see, okay, where are actually the emissions happening? Where are the problems? So building materials is a big one. You have concrete and steel making up 7 and 8% of global emissions. So that's a problem we are trying to see where we can do something. Operating energy from the building stock, like heating and cooling, is even bigger altogether. And if you look at like the need for cooling in the global south, and you look at those curves, it's pretty scary, because a lot of people are coming out of poverty into a middle class life, and also the world is heating up. So you need more of that even in Scandinavia and places like Berlin, right? Like the last heat waves have shown that people are gonna like start cooling their homes in these parts of the world too, and that's, I guess, a really big topic. So we focus on actually also a lot on that. And I think there's a lot of like in the whole materiality of like all the material inputs that we use for all kinds of things in worldwide. At some point, at the end of the day, they're either derived directly from hydrocarbons or they are like generated through the burning of hydrocarbons. And there is a lot of interesting things going on in terms of converting carbon directly or indirectly to some of these materials that we need at massive scale. We have not yet made an investment as such in that domain, but it's something we're looking very much into and would really be excited if we can help like address that kind of vector. And that could turn into building materials, or it could turn into packaging. I mean, it could turn into many things, but that's definitely an important side. But I mean, logistics, there's so much going on. I mean, if you just make optimized logistics, like mileage alone, like there's so much hidden optimization in that. So there are really lots of points you can start with. But I think it's important, like start with the problem, and find the purpose that you then are excited about, and then like combine the ideas and the people and the capital and the industrial partners, whatever you need to follow that pathway, and have a good sense of how long it's going to take.
And do you actually think that humanity has to cut back on their style of living and actually make sacrifices down the line to save the planet? Or do you have a positive view on that and think actually technology and our progress will make up for that?
I think the answer is, for me, simple. Today there are maybe, I don't know, 300-400 million people on the planet who will change their behavior based on their conscience. I mean, like based on a belief that what they're doing now is creating like a negative externality or damaging the planet or society at maximum. Like the other like 7 billion or however it is, and then they're coming from a completely different point of view, because they're rising out of a survival economy, and you just don't have time to care about those needs, right? It's much more basic. So I think we need to just develop, like invest into, innovate, and facilitate the arrival of technologies that are like better, or at least as good, cheaper, or at least cost comparable, and that basically are not creating these negative externalities and these problems for the ecology, but also for society, by the way. So I think it's naive to believe that we're all going to feel that this is really important and we should be doing something when like you have like 2 billion people that are struggling to feed the families, or it's just not realistic, right? We need to just do a lot better without destroying the planet.
Yeah.
I think we've also proven time and time again that we're incapable of doing so as a mass population of consumers. So I think at some point, if you're going to put your money somewhere, you might as well put it into technologies that can hopefully move the needle far enough, rather than hoping that out of some kind of other motivation, people who have been consuming a lot up until now, or have been fighting for survival, for example, simply cut down on the luxuries that they've spent their lifetime trying to now afford themselves. It's easy for us to say cut down because we've always been afforded those luxuries. So, then trying to put a blanket slate and say like, well, no, now everybody has to cut down is also something that I think in terms of an equitable approach probably isn't nearly as equitable as we might hope it is. But yeah, I think in general, that's the whole challenge of all climate tech companies, right? Is to say, we appreciate we're consumers and we like to consume, but is there not a way that we can consume more responsibly, and responsibly being just creating less harm for the environment, simply because the technologies or the solutions that we put into the market are preserving the environment rather than extracting from it. So I think that's kind of the main, or the golden nugget that we're all chasing to try and bring that to market as quickly as possible as well, because the time is of the essence, essentially.
But hopefully there is some kind of, trickle down effects is a dirty word today, right? But hopefully there are downstream effects, so that, in the markets, in the economies where like there's a high concentration of these like few 100 million people who actually really care, and especially the younger generations who are telling their parents to step up the game and stop doing the wrong thing. Here we have the resources to actually come up with these solutions and bring them to market. And then we need to drive down the cost curve so that they become affordable and applicable to the wider globe. And I think that's the opportunity we have now, right? So there's really like a perfect storm of regulatory change, consumer behavior change, expectations from and needs and demands from capital markets. So I think now that the capital, the ideas, and the best people are coming together to solve some of these big societal and ecological problems, and regulators are kind of about to step up the task quite. I mean, it's happening quite slowly, but then you realize all of a sudden you have all these like directives from the EU that are putting like behavioral forces on financial markets, on the non-financial markets, and it's like brewing for a long time, and all of a sudden it's here, and you're like, oh, that's actually going to matter soon for me too. So I think that's the interesting piece. And then so it's on us. I mean, we messed up the world, you can say, in the northern hemisphere, and now we have to kind of make the investments to make up for that and make them scale so that they also can go to work in Africa and the global south in general. So I think that's hopefully how we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even on top of that, also enabling all these other countries in the southern hemisphere maybe to scale into these industrial companies without having that footprint of that we had while we were scaling.
Yeah. And concrete and cement is a great example. It's the biggest value stream after water in the world. And I mean, we did the homework, right? As one of our first deep dives as a thematic investor, and we just realized, well, we're not going to avoid building with concrete and cement in any near future, because there is no scalable alternative, and it's the most user-friendly product on the planet almost. Like anyone can sort of build some structure, and the materials that are needed are available everywhere, and so we have to make concrete and cement part of the solution, not part of the problem. And there is a pathway to get there. It's highly scientific and capital intensive and difficult, but it will happen. There's no doubt in my mind that's what's going to happen. But I think that innovation will happen in Europe and North America and China maybe, and then hopefully it has to be cost competitive. Nobody in that industry is going to buy a premium cement or premium concrete. It just doesn't exist. It can be as green as hell, but nobody cares if they don't get the same price per square meter they're building. It's not going to sell.
Yeah, but I like the spirit. I like the positivity that it will happen and that we can make it. So that's cool. Looking at time, we are already we overshot a bit. So I think at some point we have to come to a close. I will end with one quick question though, one popcorn style question with a quick answer. If to all of you. So if I'm asking what are the greatest hurdles still to overcome to enable a sustainable future for our planet, what would that be? Maybe Lluís first.
Yeah, I think that coming from FMCG and taking into consideration that most of the footprint comes from in use, I think that we need to really dedicate a lot to education and to really bring more knowledge to our consumers, and we are part of that responsibility. So I think that would be one.
Claire, what do you say?
I'd say the biggest hurdle is that we have no standardization for impact tracking or the way that they're reported today. So I think we need to start holding them to the same level of scrutiny as financial reports. They're standardized across the globe, just so that we know where we are, because right now it's just hard to even pinpoint where on this trajectory of climate disaster we truly are, who's doing a good job, who's doing a bad job. So I think until we really know clearly, and until consumers know who's doing a good job and who's doing a bad job, we probably will have a difficult time really understanding our own progress or lack thereof.
Yeah, very true. I mean, we made an investment exactly on that, into that problem, or solving that problem, hopefully. I would add to that, I think project finance is really like a thing, like how do you finance some of these like heavier businesses with a different capital mix? That's something where what the industry has to kind of, I think, relearn in a way. And I do think still there's a lot of regulatory barriers. Like how do we get to a point where the structural like safety or fire safety of cross-laminated timber is effectively the same in Vienna and Hamburg and London and Stockholm, because it technically is, but from the regulatory perspective, it's not. So that fragmentation of building codes and regulation is definitely a problem for some of the big topics.
Okay, I'm hearing very, very different topics, so we still have some work to do. Okay, but I will leave it at that. So thanks a lot to all of you. I think super exciting to hear views on everything we discussed. I will hand over to Maria Lynn for the final remarks of the session. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you. Thanks to the panel. Thanks everyone for hanging in for more than 2 hours. We've heard a lot of interesting insights and from very different angles. But I think one thing was that was in common for everyone, for all the panelists and speakers, and that's the big enthusiasm for the huge potential of industrial tech that is still ahead of us. So with that in mind, the future of industry going green and digital, thanks so much for for your contribution and staying with us. Please feel invited to download the report, to like it, to share it. And you can find it on our website, but as said, you will also receive a link. With that, have a wonderful evening and hope to see you at our next Industrial Tech Talk next year.